I was present when the chamber fell silent, when the alien council first understood what humanity had done. The revelation did not arrive with explosions or declarations of war. It came quietly, through maps and numbers, through fault diagrams layered beneath glowing projections of human cities. I remember the way the elders leaned forward, their long lives shaped by tectonic caution, their civilizations built far from instability. They had invited me to narrate Earth's urban history as context. They were not prepared for truth. Human cities bloomed across the display, vast, luminous, impossibly dense. Names were unnecessary. What mattered were the lines beneath them. Jagged seams of planetary fracture glowed crimson, intersecting streets, foundations, transit systems. The council's geological analysts began murmuring in disbelief. I said nothing at first. I let the data speak. Entire megacities rested atop grinding plates, balanced on faults that had shattered continents elsewhere. To the council, this was not bravery. It was madness. One delegate finally spoke, voice trembling. Why would they build there? The question echoed through the chamber. I had spent decades studying humanity. I had asked myself the same question. I answered simply, because the land was there, because the water was there, because they arrived and they stayed. The silence deepened. To the council, survival meant minimizing risk. To humans, survival meant enduring it. They examined seismic records next. Quakes that would have ended other civilizations outright were cataloged as events. Disasters survived. Lessons absorbed. Cities collapsed, were rebuilt. Populations fled, returned. Infrastructure bent, broke, and adapted. Humanity did not abandon fault lines. They reinforced them. They learned the rhythm of the planet's violence and built to withstand it, accepting loss as part of continuity. This concept disturbed the council more than any weapon ever had. I watched realization spread. Humans did not merely accept instability, they normalized it. Generations were raised knowing the ground could betray them without warning. Emergency drills were taught alongside arithmetic. Buildings were designed to sway, not stand rigid. Bridges were made to flex, not resist. Humanity had engineered resilience into daily life, not as a response to invasion, but as preparation for existence itself. A council historian whispered, "They live on a breaking world." I corrected him. They live with it. The difference mattered. Humans did not seek perfect conditions. They adapted to imperfect ones. They thrived in regions others deemed uninhabitable. Fault lines were not warnings to them. They were boundaries to negotiate, challenges to overcome, forces to be respected rather than feared. Then the strategic analyst spoke, and the room grew colder. Cities built on fault lines produced populations conditioned to unpredictability. People who planned redundancies instinctively. Governments that rehearsed disaster response as routine. Economies that factored collapse and recovery into long-term growth. Humanity's urban design had forged psychological armor. They were not hardened by war, but by nature itself. The council began to understand the implication. If a species could accept the planet tearing beneath their feet and still choose to build upward, outward, together, what would they do when threatened by an external enemy? What would fear mean to a civilization raised knowing safety was temporary? The council did not say it aloud, but I felt it settle across them like gravity. This was not recklessness. This was conditioning. The final map appeared, projected expansion zones beyond Earth. The same pattern repeated. Humans established settlements on unstable moons, volcanically active worlds, tectonically volatile regions avoided by others. Not out of ignorance. Out of confidence. They did not seek safety. They sought opportunity, trusting themselves to adapt faster than environments could destroy them. When the session ended, no one spoke. The council dismissed me in silence. As I left the chamber, I understood what they had truly learned. Humanity was not dangerous because it fought wars. Humanity was dangerous because it built homes where others would not dare to stand. After the council adjourned, they summoned me alone. No historians, no strategists, only the eldest geological arbiters whose civilizations had survived by avoiding catastrophe. Their chamber was darker, the projections gone, replaced by raw stone and silence. They wanted understanding, not data. They wanted to know how a species could choose to live atop a planet's open wounds and call it civilization. I told them the truth as I knew it, even as it unsettled them. Humans did not begin with fault lines. They began with rivers, with fertile soil, with places where life was easiest. But populations grew, borders hardened, and safety became a luxury. When space ran out, they did not retreat. They adapted. The ground shook, buildings fell, and humanity learned. Each collapse became instruction. Each disaster rewrote their methods. Survival was not avoidance. It was iteration. The arbiters studied recordings of human cities during seismic events. Sirens wailed. Structures swayed. People ran not in panic but in patterns. Evacuation routes were memorized from childhood. Emergency kits were commonplace. Communication systems shifted automatically. Within hours, rescue networks mobilized. Within days, rebuilding began. I saw the moment the arbiters understood this was not courage. It was conditioning. One asked whether humans feared the ground itself. I answered honestly. They did. But fear did not paralyze them. It informed them. Fear became a teacher. Children learned that the world was unstable, that safety was earned daily, that preparation was responsibility. These lessons did not fade with adulthood. They shaped governance, architecture, and social bonds. Communities learned to rely on one another because the planet demanded it. The council compared this to their own histories. When instability threatened, they migrated. When environments grew hostile, they abandoned them. Their civilizations were built on minimizing risk. Humanity's was built on managing it. That difference echoed far beyond geology. It shaped how humans viewed failure, loss, and recovery. Collapse was not an ending. It was a phase. Strategic analysts later presented simulations. Populations raised amid constant environmental threat adapted faster to sudden crises. Their decision-making under stress was refined. They accepted uncertainty as baseline reality. When confronted with invasion scenarios, these populations showed higher resilience, quicker reorganization, and a disturbing willingness to continue functioning despite devastation. The fault lines had trained them long before any enemy arrived. I saw fear enter the council then, real and unguarded. A species that normalized instability could endure chaos others could not. Their cities were not just settlements. They were crucibles. Each tremor, each collapse, each reconstruction reinforced a collective understanding. The world could end tomorrow, so prepare today. The council realized this mindset could not be unlearned. They asked whether humans would abandon such cities if given safer worlds. I answered carefully. Some would. Many would not. Humans formed attachments to places forged through shared hardship. Cities on fault lines became symbols of persistence. To leave them felt like surrender. They rebuilt not because it was rational but because it was theirs. Identity was fused to survival. As the meeting ended, one arbiter spoke softly. "They are not reckless," he said. "They are rehearsed." I did not disagree. Humanity had spent centuries practicing recovery. Every quake was a lesson. Every rebuild was refinement. While other civilizations planned for peace, humans planned for disruption. And they had done so without ever knowing the galaxy was watching. When I left the chamber, I understood the council's unease. A species that could build cities on breaking ground would not crumble easily under pressure. The fault lines beneath Earth had not weakened humanity. They had tempered it. And the council had only begun to grasp what that truly meant. What troubled them most was not the cities themselves, but the patience required to sustain them. Generations planned for disasters they might never see, investing resources into contingencies instead of comfort. This long view shaped human time perception. They measured progress not in uninterrupted growth, but in recovery cycles. Stability was temporary. Continuity was victory. In that understanding, the council sensed a species already prepared for collapse, invasion, and loss on a scale the galaxy had rarely endured. Such minds not wait for catastrophe, they assumed it was inevitable. The council's fear deepened when they shifted from geology to history. They asked me not about buildings but about time, about how long humanity had lived this way, balanced atop uncertainty. I showed them records spanning millennia. Empires rose and fell along fault lines. Cities were destroyed, names erased, yet people returned to the same broken ground. Not because they forgot the danger, but because they remembered surviving it. Humanity's relationship with instability was ancient, ingrained, and cumulative. They studied patterns of migration after catastrophic earthquakes. Humans fled, yes, but only temporarily. When the ground settled, they returned. Sometimes generations later, sometimes immediately. They rebuilt atop ruins, reinforcing foundations with new knowledge, incorporating scars into design. The past was not buried. It was structural. Each disaster left behind a blueprint for resilience. The council struggled to comprehend this persistence. To them, memory was a warning. To humans, memory was instruction. I explained how this shaped human governance. Emergency powers were normalized. Redundant systems were mandatory. Leadership was judged not by prosperity alone, but by response to disaster. Politicians fell not because calamities occurred, but because preparation failed. Accountability was bound to survival. Entire bureaucracies existed solely to plan for catastrophe. Humanity treated collapse as a certainty, not a possibility. This worldview unnerved the council more than any military doctrine could. The military analysts then requested comparisons. They overlaid earthquake response data with simulated invasion scenarios. The similarities were immediate and disturbing. Rapid decentralization. Local autonomy paired with central coordination. Civilian populations trained to follow protocols without panic. Supply chains designed to reroute automatically. Cities segmented into zones capable of independent function. These were not wartime adaptations. They were disaster responses, repurposed seamlessly. Humanity's cities were already structured for siege conditions, without ever naming them as such. One analyst asked if humans realized this advantage. I told them the truth. Most did not. They called it preparedness, community safety, resilience planning. They did not frame it as strategy. But intent was irrelevant. Outcome was everything. A species that prepared for the ground itself to betray them would not be paralyzed by an enemy's attack. They had rehearsed chaos since childhood. The council requested psychological profiles next. Humans raised in seismic zones exhibited heightened adaptability, faster stress recovery, and an unusual tolerance for uncertainty. Trauma existed, yes, but so did collective coping mechanisms. Rituals of rebuilding. Shared narratives of survival. Annual remembrance ceremonies that honored not just the dead, but the act of continuing. Humanity did not glorify disaster, but it did not shy away from it either. This emotional architecture supported their physical one. As days passed, the council's tone shifted from curiosity to calculation. They asked whether fault-line cities produced different kinds of leaders. I showed them case studies. Leaders forged in unstable regions prioritized redundancy over efficiency, flexibility over rigidity. They planned for failure openly. They accepted that systems would break and designed authority structures that could bend without snapping. These leaders thrived in uncertainty because uncertainty was familiar. The council finally asked the question they had been circling since the beginning. If they can live like this, what happens when they leave their planet? I showed them the expansion data, again. The same pattern repeated across the stars. Humans did not seek the safest worlds. They sought viable ones. Worlds with challenges to solve. They terraformed not to eliminate danger, but to manage it. Even in space, they recreated conditions that demanded vigilance. Comfort, they believed, bred complacency. I realized then that the council's fear was no longer abstract. It was personal. Their civilizations were built on stability. Their histories were linear, their progress uninterrupted. Humanity's was cyclical. Rise, fall, rebuild. This rhythm had taught them patience, endurance, and a terrifying calm in the face of destruction. To humans, collapse was not the end of a story. It was the middle. When the council recessed, I remained alone with the projections still glowing faintly. Fault lines crisscrossed Earth like veins, pulsing beneath cities that refused to move. I understood the truth they were struggling to accept. Humanity was not strong despite living on unstable ground. Humanity was strong because of it. The planet had trained them, shaped them, and tested them relentlessly. And they had passed again and again. What unsettled the council most was the implication that no amount of external pressure would easily break such a species. They had already learned how to live while everything beneath them shifted. An enemy could destroy cities, shatter infrastructure, disrupt order. Humans would mourn, adapt, and rebuild. They always had. The fault lines had taught them that survival was not about preventing disaster, but about enduring it, and that lesson was written deep into their civilization. The Council's final inquiry was not about cities, history, or psychology. It was about intent. They asked me whether humanity chose this path, or whether it had been forced upon them by circumstance. The distinction mattered deeply to them. A species shaped by accident was one thing. A species that willingly embraced instability was another entirely. I told them the answer lay somewhere in between, and that uncertainty itself was the defining trait. Humans did not worship danger. They mitigated it, studied it, argued with it. But when faced with the choice between retreat and adaptation, they overwhelmingly chose adaptation. Their records were filled with debates, whether to rebuild, whether to relocate, whether to abandon ancestral cities. And again they decided to stay. Not blindly, not ignorantly, with full awareness of the cost. The Council struggled with this notion. To them, survival was avoidance. To humans, survival was persistence. I showed them footage of reconstruction after catastrophic earthquakes. Not the destruction that was already understood, but the rebuilding. Communities gathering amid ruins. Volunteers arriving without summons. Engineers redesigning structures overnight. Children playing among scaffolding. There was grief, yes, but it moved alongside resolve. Humans rebuilt before wounds had fully healed. The Council noticed something chilling: speed. Humanity wasted little time mourning what could not be changed. They grieved, then acted. This pattern extended into governance. Emergency laws activated instantly, then deactivated once stability returned. Power flowed temporarily, then receded. Humans practiced relinquishing control as much as seizing it. Authority was situational, not absolute. The Council realized this made human societies extraordinarily hard to destabilize. Remove a leader, and another emerged. Break a system, and an alternative activated. Collapse was anticipated, not feared. The military observers then delivered their conclusion. Cities built on fault lines had unintentionally become training grounds for total war survival. Civilians accustomed to evacuation, rationing, and infrastructure failure adapted to siege conditions with disturbing efficiency. Panic thresholds were higher. Recovery times shorter. Even morale rebounded faster than expected. Humanity did not freeze when systems failed. They expected failure. That expectation was their shield. I sensed the Council's unease turning into something closer to dread. They asked whether humanity understood how this appeared to others. I answered honestly. Most did not think about it at all. To humans, this was simply life. The planet was unstable. The future uncertain. So they planned, adapted, and continued. They did not imagine this made them exceptional. They assumed it was normal. That assumption alone frightened the Council more than any calculated threat. One elder finally spoke what the others would not. If such a species were threatened with extinction, he said slowly, would they surrender? The chamber was silent. I chose my words carefully. They would not see extinction as a single event. They would see it as a series of disasters. And they would respond to each one. That answer settled heavily over the Council. Humanity would not break all at once. It would fracture, regroup, and endure. The discussion turned to interstellar implications. If humans built cities on fault lines without hesitation, what would they do with unstable star systems, volatile planets, or contested regions of space? The data already answered that. They would settle them,
Fortify them.
normalize the danger. What others considered no-go zones, humans considered frontiers. Risk was not a deterrent. It was an invitation to problem-solving. By the end of the session, the Council no longer debated whether humanity was dangerous. That question had been answered. The true concern was predictability. A species that treated instability as baseline reality could not be easily intimidated. Threats relied on fear. Fear relied on the promise of safety being removed. Humans had never assumed safety in the first place. As the Council dismissed me, I felt the weight of their realization. Humanity's greatest strength was not technology, weapons, or numbers. It was mindset. Cities on fault lines were not accidents of history. They were expressions of a deeper truth. Humans built their lives knowing everything could collapse, and they chose to build anyway. That choice echoed far beyond Earth. It shaped how they would respond to invasion, collapse, and loss. The Council now understood that if humanity ever faced the galaxy as an adversary, it would not fight from a place of desperation, but from long-practiced resilience. And that realization left them quietly terrified, staring at maps of cities that refused to move, built on ground that never stopped trying to break them. The final session convened without ceremony. No projections. No simulations. Only the Council, seated in a circle that had not been used since their own first existential crisis millennia ago. I was not asked to present data. They already had it. What they wanted now was judgment. Not of humanity, but of themselves. One by one, the elders spoke of their own histories. Civilizations that fled unstable worlds. Species that abandoned planets at the first sign of tectonic unrest. Cultures that equated safety with wisdom and danger with folly. They had survived for eons by choosing calm, predictable environments. And yet, here they were, confronted with a species that had done the opposite, and thrived. The implication was unbearable. Perhaps avoidance had not been wisdom. Perhaps it had been limitation. They asked me what humanity would do if the galaxy rejected them for this trait. If borders closed. If access to stable worlds was denied. I did not hesitate. They would adapt, I said. They always do. Denial had never stopped humans. It had only redirected them. When doors closed, they built new ones. When ground fractured, they reinforced it. Rejection would not slow them. It would focus them. The Council's final fear emerged then, raw and unmasked. Humanity's cities on fault lines were not just symbols of resilience. They were proof of a philosophy incompatible with galactic norms. Humans did not seek permission from the universe to exist comfortably. They existed anyway. They would settle volatile systems, exploit_toggle unpredictable resources, and normalize risk until it ceased to be exceptional. In doing so, they would redefine what habitable meant for everyone else. An elder asked the question no one had voiced. If conflict comes, will they break? I answered with the only truth history allowed. They will bend. They will lose cities. They will lose worlds. And they will continue. Humanity did not measure victory by preservation alone. It measured it by continuity. As long as something endured, culture, memory, purpose, the species endured. Total defeat required absolute erasure. And even then, humans planned redundancies. The Council reviewed one final report. Human contingency planning extended beyond cities and planets. Archives were scattered across space. Knowledge duplicated endlessly. Cultural memory preserved in countless forms. Even extinction scenarios were modeled, with plans to ensure fragments survived. Humanity had prepared for the possibility of losing everything, and planned to leave something behind regardless. This was not paranoia. It was philosophy. Nothing was permanent. So everything must be preserved in pieces. Silence settled heavily over the chamber. The Council realized, too late, that humanity's greatest weapon was not aggression. It was acceptance. Acceptance that loss was inevitable, that collapse was normal, and that rebuilding was sacred. Threats meant little to a species that already lived with the knowledge that the ground beneath them could open without warning. The final vote was not unanimous. Some argued for distance, others for containment. A few, quietly, argued for alliance, recognizing a kindred resilience they themselves had abandoned long ago. But no decision was reached. The council deferred, something it rarely did. Humanity was not a problem that could be solved quickly. It was a force that required time, observation, and caution. As I left the chamber for the last time, I looked back at the empty circle. I understood what none of them had said aloud. The galaxy had always believed danger came from ambition, from conquest, from malice. They had never considered that danger could come from persistence, from a species that refused to stop building, even when the universe itself seemed unstable. Humanity would not rush the stars recklessly. They would settle them the way they settled fault lines, slowly, stubbornly, prepared for collapse and committed to return. They would build cities where others would not, lives where others fled, futures where others hesitated. And in time, the galaxy would be shaped not by those who avoided instability, but by those who learned to live with it. Somewhere on Earth, the ground shifted. Buildings swayed. People steadied themselves, followed protocols, helped one another, and continued their days. The council did not see that moment, but it haunted them nonetheless. Because a species that treated catastrophe as routine did not fear the universe. It adapted to it.